Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Roundtable. As executives, where are we spending our resources? Your moderator is John McElroy of Blue Sky Productions and Autoline. You are invited to submit questions for today's Roundtable through the SAE International's WCX app. Ladies and gentlemen, John McElroy.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. We got one whale of a good panel right here. Let me introduce the panelists to you. Kathy Winter is with Mobileye, which is part of Intel, has a tremendous amount of automotive background, has gone from this area out into Silicon Valley, so we're going to be getting a bit of perspective from both sides of the view. Ken Washington is the CTO of the Ford Motor Company. Jeff Hemphill is the CTO with Schaeffler Technologies. John Lochner is the CTO of General Motors. And Helen Tan is with Baidu. And I want to thank you all for being here on the panel. And of course, what we wanted to talk about is, how are all you figuring out how you deploy the resources that you've got? Because as you all know, we're in a very interesting automotive world right now. One foot in technology that has been around for almost a century, another foot going into what the future is all going to bring us. And there's been so much hype about autonomous vehicles, electrification, mobility services, and the like. Ken Washington, you're somebody who said, okay, when we get into this panel, let's keep it real. Let's talk about what's really going on right now. So let's kick it off with autonomous vehicles, because there's so much in the headlines right now. Why don't you give us a reality check? What do you think so many people are perceiving it to be, and what do you think it's really going to be?
Well, I think we're over the peak of the hype curve, thank goodness, because at the peak of the hype curve, there was just so much hype that wasn't grounded in reality, that wasn't very helpful, wasn't useful. So I think we have a responsibility as leaders in the automotive industry to keep it real, to bring it back down to what's going to really matter. And the best way to frame it, I think, is to use the words that you started with, which is a foot in the technology that we've known and loved for years in the automotive industry, and the ushering in of all these new digital technologies, ranging from artificial intelligence to connectivity. To keep it real and to ground it in reality, you got to bring those 2 feet together, because to really bring this technology of autonomy in a vehicle to life, you've got to put it into a vehicle, meaning you have to deal with a lot of complex integration issues, you've got to make it safe, you've got to do certification and testing, you've got to deal with how do you introduce the vehicle into society in a way that's going to make society better as opposed to worse. So there's a lot of work to do to make it really work and create a real valid business. Because we have to remember that everybody on stage here is in a business, but we're also in the business of making people's lives better with mobility. So where we are today is finishing the technology. There's still a lot of work to do to bring level 4, fully autonomous, what we would call self-driving technology to the market, both on the technology side and on the vehicle integration and policy, safety, validation side. And then there's still ongoing work to continue to make our vehicles that we sell increasingly better with autonomous features. And a lot of times we get those two confused. And so we just got to keep those separate and know that we still have a lot of work to do on the full autonomy front.
John Lochner, I hear people tell me all the time, autonomous vehicles, it's so far away from now, it's way down the road, it's been totally overhyped, and yet GM Cruise is supposed to come to market sometime this year with autonomous ride-hailing. So put a little bit in perspective. What would you tell somebody who comes and says, nah, autonomy, that's years away from happening?
Well, I think what happens is we treat everything as equally difficult. And I think being able to deploy autonomous vehicles in a ride-sharing fleet in a geofenced area where you've done extensive testing and development is way different than having mass AV adoption, where the cars have to work on every road all the time in any weather condition, no excuses, no nothing, right? It's got to be perfect. That's way harder than something that you would do in a ride-sharing environment where you're talking about a relatively small area, paved roads, you know, all of the stuff that's going to make that relatively straightforward as compared to trying to do mass AVs, autonomous vehicles for everyone. And so I think most analysts, most of the Wall Street analysts, most of the commentators, they've pushed out their forecast, their crystal ball speculation by many years in terms of when you're going to see what we call SAE level 5 or mass AVs available for, you know, retail buyers around the country.
Helen Pan, you're with Baidu, Chinese company. I'd love to hear your perspective on it, and especially what's going on in China. Has it been overhyped? Are consumer expectations realistic, or what?
Okay, so in terms of this new technology coming, we see 4 different arms. So one thing is EV, electrical vehicle. Another thing is connected cars. And third is the autonomous driving AV. And third is mobility service. So I definitely see in the electrical vehicle is happening in China. About 50% of the electrical vehicles sold in China based on the data from 2017. And then I also see in the connected vehicles is also starting happening in China. And the other two is merging as a new technology coming up. And there are a couple things unique in China compared to the rest of the world. Things I see uniquely is the people in China actually have more willingness to adapt new technology. And they did a survey just for the connected vehicles. And what they see is they have 60% more people willing to use it, and 60% people willing to pay for it. And all the rest of the country, I see the survey in US is 30 something, you know, all of them. So that's actually, you know, a new things in China. Secondary, I heard, you know, just announced, between the Beijing have a satellite city called Xun'an, announced about 2 years ago. And they just set up a new highway between Beijing and Xun'an. Their distance about 100 kilometers, and they make 2 of the traffic lanes dedicated for autonomous driving. So they're trying to make some infrastructure friendly to help for this industry to be able to boom and grow.
Real good. Kathy Winter with Mobileye. Let's get your viewpoint on it. Overhyped? Is that the public perception? What dose of reality would you put out there? Or would you say, no, we got to keep pushing this even more strongly?
Well, a couple things. I'm actually going to agree with the hype comments, but I'm going to stop short of we shouldn't keep pushing it strongly. We should keep pushing it strongly. So, you know, I think the way we think about it Intel now is we went through the hype stage where we were really focused on get something on the road, the technology, can we even make this happen? And now I think we all sit here 2-3 years later and we're at a different stage. I think now we're very focused on what are the technology building blocks that we could be putting out there today, maybe improving level 1, level 2 systems, but making them safer and safer, but taking those same technologies that could be applied for level 4, level 5 later down the way, right? So as you think of, you know, enhancing level 2 systems, whether it's with better mapping, you know, fusion of sensor data, et cetera, there's things that now apply later. So they're reusable, but we can bring them to market today in a real way. I think the second key thing we're focused on very much now is how do you make this scalable and something that really could be put out in mass production, right? We need to focus on that now because we know how long that takes, right? So instead of just focusing on what it takes to get pilots out on the road, how do we get something that's really going to be either affordable for the consumers or the mass providers, the logistics companies, things like that. And then the third place would really be focusing on how do we make sure it's safe, right? Talking about the safety models, how do we as an industry make sure that the safety isn't what keeps these vehicles from getting out on the streets, because we know it's going to be safer than all of us combined as human drivers, and that's really the end goal.
Jeff Hempel, here we've been hearing from automakers and tech companies. Schaeffler, of course, is a company with a lot of advanced technology, but also a lot of traditional technology. So how do you look out on this whole debate as to when AVs may be coming or not?
Well, I think we're in a somewhat fortunate position because the level 2 to level 5 really doesn't matter to us so much, because actually in the Internet of Things, we're mostly making the things. And so we're in the powertrain, wheel motors, electric axles. We even make wheel bearings, which is maybe one of the only things that a car in 20 years will have that it also has today, so we're in that position. So you need all those things for all the levels of autonomy. Not to say that there's no work to do there. Of course, there's a tremendous amount to manage the cost of them, manage the weight of actuation, for example, safety. One of the big areas, in fact, we just acquired a company called Paravan that makes road-certified steer-by-wire systems, which we think will play well with robo-taxi type of vehicles. So work to do, but fortunately for us, we have product to sell across the spectrum. So
I'd like to get into now how you all figure out where to put your resources. John Lochner, why don't I start out with you on this? And I'm just going to ask it open-ended, and then others can jump in as well. But the ICE is not going away anytime soon, but it is going to go away at some point, it looks.
Yep.
How do you figure out, as the CTO, a GM, where you should be putting your resources, investigating new opportunities for the ICE, or has that come to an end right now? And are you putting everything into electrification, or you take it from there?
Well, okay, so I don't think it's an either or. People want to say, well, you're either going to invest in EVs or you're going to invest in ICEs. It's not an either or proposition. At least in the near term, it winds up being a both proposition. I think, we've been building EVs for more than 10 years, going back to the Chevrolet Volt, and even before that, the EV1. And we have a pretty good understanding of some of the things that we have to get after to make EVs more affordable and more capable, and therefore a more perfect replacement for an internal combustion engine car. Battery technology looms largely because it, in a certain way, dictates how much range you're going to get out of a single charge, how much the level of power that you're going to be able to deliver, and so on and so forth. It also is the biggest single cost element in an EV by far, and so in a certain way it defines the path to profitability. Right behind that in EVs is motors and power electronics. So that's where you're going to put your resources as you look farther out into the future. We just got done launching a new technology for ICE engines in our 2009 Chevrolet Silverado and GMC Sierra. It's dynamic fuel management. I think the panel that you had right before this had Scott Bailey from Tula Technologies, and Tula developed a very clever software algorithm that allows a V8 engine to run on as few as 2 cylinders and as many as 8 cylinders. It makes a calculation 80 times a second as to how many cylinders need to fire in order to deliver the required torque, and which ones to fire, because it varies which ones it's going to fire, so you don't have vibration. It's a perfect example of a cylinder deactivation technology. We started back on cylinder deactivation in 2005. It was an 8-4 scheme, a fixed scheme. Now we have the ability to completely vary the number of cylinders, and you get better fuel economy, lower CO2 emissions. It's a perfect example of extending the capability of an internal combustion engine vehicle. There are more things like that that are on the horizon. So, if you look at maybe resource deployment as 100%, perhaps in the past we were 70% ICEs and 30% EVs. I think over time you're going to see that switch, and it'll wind up being 30% ICEs and 70% EVs. And so it goes.
So I'd like to build on something that Helen and John and Jeff all said, which is, I think, a common thing that all three of them said that I want to highlight is the topic of software and digital. The topic of dynamic firing of different cylinders is possible because we now have very sophisticated software algorithms, and when we can put vehicles in a region that has intelligence in the region, that we can synchronize the vehicle with, so that you're dealing with intelligence in the vehicle and intelligence in the world to create a better outcome, so that you can more quickly deploy an autonomous vehicle or get more value out of a connected non-autonomous vehicle. That's made possible because of digital technologies, both sensing and software and artificial intelligence. And the physical things that are made by companies like Schaeffler are getting more intelligent as well. And so one of the things that's shaping our investment portfolio at Ford, and I think the same is true for other companies, is we're becoming much more of a software and digital company. We're having to build our capabilities in that space. We're having to forge new partnerships in the space of digital and software and artificial intelligence and data and analytics, so that we can build these capabilities to make them intelligent, because the future is going to be much more than just about autonomous vehicles. It's going to have connected cars, electric vehicles, it's going to have all kinds of software modules that control the efficiency. Battery efficiency is going to be driven by advanced control algorithms that are driven by very sophisticated software codes. So that's a huge area of investment for us that is not targeted to any one thing like an internal combustion engine or an electric propulsion system. It's really a center of excellence kind of thought.
So just maybe to take a different twist a little bit on this question, from an Intel perspective, we're big into trying to solve really big problems and really into innovation. I think one of the things that we've really tried to bring to the autonomous driving space is to say, hey, maybe we don't need to do it all ourselves. So as I think about where I invest resources, definitely invest heavily on, like I said, these technologies that we can put in today, especially to enhance those level 2 systems, and incrementally, while we work on the end game, make sure we're investing on the incrementals along the way that could be rolled out into production and in a faster way than maybe in the past. But then I think the other thing we really think about is what do we have to do ourselves versus find a really good partner. So I spend quite a bit of our time with our more forward-looking folks, not just looking, can we invent it ourselves, but who's out there in the marketplace, what companies are out there, whether they're huge partners or very small startups. And I think in the past, we as an industry maybe focused on, hey, it's got to come out of Silicon Valley, it's got to be a startup. But in reality, there's some really big companies, even sitting on this stage that are doing really startup type things. So investing the right people on our team to be that partner to help pull those technologies in or find what do we each do best, what are the synergies, is kind of a new way of doing it versus the traditional, have an army of engineers, I know we can solve it, we have a ton of smart people, but maybe that's not the fastest way to get there.
Helen, how do you do that? How do you figure out who you should be partnering with the rate of technological change that we're seeing right now? How do you make sure you don't go with some startup or a company bringing you a new idea that might just get obsoleted, or do you just run with the risk anyway?
Oh, it's a very good question. So I think Baidu actually took in a really unique approach. About 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, they announced Apollo. It's open platforms. So we're the first one actually taking this open approach to collaboration. I consider currently, particularly for the AV field, I think is in the pre-competition stage. That means now the more players join in, the sooner we can get this technology available to the consumer. In able to do so, I think getting these right partners and collaborating with everybody, developing this total solution is very critical. So Baidu, is more in the software side. We're really good at it, cybersecurity and other things. And on the other hand, many other hardware side and everything, we would like to collaborating with the whole industry. We want in the early stage, you barely can find out some mature for the vendor even purchase things. So you either develop in-house or you collaborate with the industry and jointly develop together to demonstrating this is working. So we're still in this stage. We're demonstrating some degree is working, but we need providing a safe solution. The safety has 3 aspects. So first aspect is the functional safety in terms of hardware, software, and compliance. And the second is the cybersecurity. You make sure now you have so much software and the internet connectivity to the vehicle, you make sure nobody attack you. And that's now the trivial task. And the third one is emergency reaction, how it can be quickly react to it to safely. So all those level of complexity need to collaboration with the whole industry work together. Since Apollo launched, we already have 137 partners join Apollo, and we all work together. That's very good way for the whole industry align together to moving forward.
Jeff, same topic. You know, here's Schaeffler working on all different kinds of things. How do you decide where to place your bets?
That's not easy. We have an annual strategy planning process like most companies, so we start the year with what we call technology dialogue, where we debate all these different trends and where could we play a role, what could we help enable, that kind of thing. And then we have a group that goes out and looks for startups or partners in that space that we've defined, and when they find something interesting, then they bring it back and we decide whether to jump in and partner or acquire or whatever the case may be. So that's how we try to manage it.
Yeah.
Only time will tell if we're fast enough. That's the question.
That's right. Now I want to come back to a specific example, but John Lochner, you had mentioned Tula with this dynamic fuel management. I've driven the system. It absolutely works. Actually, GM's efforts at cylinder deactivation goes back to, I want to say 1979 or 1980. Cadillac had tried it then,
Oh, yeah.
the V864, but we didn't
Yeah.
have the processing power or the algorithms then.
Correct.
But I know when Tula first approached the industry, powertrain engineers went, nah, that'll never work, can't be
Right.
done.
Yeah.
What was it that led you guys to go, no, let's keep pushing it, or were they pushing you, or how did the change of opinion come about that, hey, wait a minute, these guys really have something here? And explain it in a way so that others grappling with this issue might learn from your example.
Okay, so, discussions with Tula went back some period of time, but most recently it was 2012. They approached us about investing in their Series C. We agreed to lead their Series C with the understanding that somehow we had to figure out whether this was going to work or not. We had a small group of people from engineering, extremely talented and capable, that spent some time with Tula and said, yeah, okay, we think we can make this thing work. Yeah, we're going to have to do some things to the basic engine. We're going to have to make it possible to deactivate any cylinder, which means that the cylinder block tooling had to change to make it possible to do that. Originally, they approached us with the idea it was going to be a separate chip. We said, no, we're going to integrate it into our basic powertrain control module. There's a lot of testing and development that's done. It's really easy to make a cylinder deactivation system work if you don't care about emissions, and if fuel economy is sort of like, oh, by the way, instead of, it's got to deliver better fuel economy or it doesn't make a lot of sense. And it turns out that the emission piece of this is non-trivial. To make sure that you don't cool the catalytic converter down below its light-off temperature and wind up with much higher exhaust emissions, to deal with the fact that you have to be careful which cylinder you're deactivating so that you don't get partially burned combustion down the tailpipe. But I give the technical community that was working for Dan Nicholson, who was running GM Propulsion Systems, I give them a lot of credit for saying, okay, we think we can make this thing work, and we're gonna go at it, and so we decided we'd invest in Tula. We did a series of development activities with them to further develop the system. We brought it into our Generation 5 D8, and it's in production, and it works, and it's really, really a slick integration the way it works.
So it's just keep slogging, keep pushing it, keep testing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that you have to overcome in any organization, whether it's large or small, is the concept of NIH. And we were very fortunate in that we didn't have to battle a lot of NIH. It wasn't, we're not doing it so nobody else can do it. It was, okay, can we overcome the technical challenges that are going to arise when we go from what we had that worked reasonably well to something that's way more advanced, but way more sophisticated, with a lot more challenges that have to be overcome. I'm really proud of the work that the propulsion system organization did, because without that, we wouldn't have it in production.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Well, I just wanted to build on that and maybe generalize it a bit. I mean, first of all, it's a really great story, and we're implementing similar systems using the same partner. But I think there's a general version of this story, which is we're living at a moment in time when we have exposure to new ideas that are coming from outside of the automotive industry. And that's kind of a new thing for us, right? So there's ideas coming to us from big tech companies, from startup companies that are supported by big venture capital money. There are ideas coming at us at an unprecedented rate out of the best universities in the world. And so you need a frame in order to evaluate those ideas and make sense of them without killing them before they have their day in court. And so the best way that we have found to do that is to charter a team with the job of harvesting ideas and giving them an evaluation, and take on the Silicon Valley mindset of this is a good idea until I prove that it's a bad idea, as opposed to that's a stupid idea until I can prove it's a good one. And that's what makes Silicon Valley special, is they really do have that mindset. And so we have a team in Silicon Valley that takes that mindset, that's mostly staffed by people we hired from the Valley, and they've got deep connections back to our home team back in Southeast Michigan. But their charter is to do things that we would find very difficult to do in Dearborn, but do it in a way that has relevance to what can end up on a product. And we have found that really works. And so when you find an idea like an AI company that says, you know what, I think we could help you inspect the samples that come out of your stamping operations using cameras and putting it through an AI engine and telling you whether or not it's good or not. We looked at them like they were from Mars when they first told us that, and turns out it works. And so this is a technology, just as one simple example, that comes to the automotive industry that's going to make us more fit, it's going to make us be able to move quicker, it's going to save cost, it's going to make a better product. And we were able to discern that by having this repeatable process to try things and then make their way into the product. That's the new world we're living in. All the great ideas don't come from the auto industry. They come from everywhere. This is just the way the digitally hyper-connected world works today. And we've got to get comfortable and get good at harvesting those ideas and folding them into our products.
Well, just to add to that, I think one of the things that you have to do also is not be hiring just the traditional workforce either, right? So used to be when we hired into automotive, okay, are you mechanical, are you electrical, or maybe we do some software, but, right? Are you hardware, mechanical, in what area? And then, it started changing, and now when you go out to the universities, there are people clamoring to go, hey, I'm robotics, I'm, AI, I'm user interface specialty, these PhDs doing amazing things that you would have said nothing to do with automotive 5-10 years ago, and they're just clamoring to get it into our space. So I think part of recognizing those ideas, wherever they're located, is looking at such a broad cross-section of new hires and different talents, whether it's new business models around transportation as a service, whether it's in the actual engineering organization, multitude of almost anything now in the vehicles. It's really exciting because I think it's made the automotive industry so much more attractive to the young folks coming out and the folks picking their PhD projects as well. They're really picking automotive, I'll use the word automotive for lack of a better word, but transportation areas of expertise where they can see, is this something we might consider 10 years out? So it's pretty cool to see how it's affecting not only our business today, but going forward.
Yeah, that's one thing I've noticed in my career. Automotive is sexy again.
It's cool.
It's cool.
Yeah.
It's happening. People want to be part of it, and I love seeing the change. Jeff, we just heard several examples here of really pushing technology, making sure that it works, throwing a lot of testing and collaboration to make it work. That doesn't happen every time. You know, it's not like every idea that a company sets its sights on works. There's a lot of failures. How do you figure out when to say, now we got to pull the plug? This is, because, you know, here's John talking about they kept pushing and pushing, pushing. At some point, though, it's not going to work. How do you know when to pull the plug?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it is important to stop because you can't do everything. We have, as Ken said, a similar process, a staged gate even for advanced development, where we go through and say, are you solving a problem that somebody really wants you to solve, or is it working? Are you going to be able to deliver it for a reasonable cost? But we don't, to Ken's point, do that too early, because any idea will be killed if you start that process at the beginning of it. Somebody said a good idea only goes as far as the talent that brushes up against it. I forget who that was, but that's what I thought of when John mentioned the Tula example. And the NVH on that one was also a lot of fun. Yeah, we're in the damper on that one too. But if you don't have all those people that come together and say, we're going to make this work, and it can be a long slog, you won't get anywhere. And ideas don't just run off by themselves. In fact, there's a kind of a myth that inventors are always afraid their idea will get stolen. But the reality is you're probably going to have to spend 10 years shoving it down people's throats before it's really going to go anywhere. So shouldn't worry so much about the theft.
Helen, your idea. What do you think? How do you know when to pull the plug on a project, and how do you know when to say, no, we got to keep pushing?
Keep pushing. This is a great question, and I think this is the day-to-day job. You always have this dilemma. You know, should I pull it? Should I pull it back? Should I push it forward? I think this is have to measure in multiple dimensions. So one dimension to like it, you know, are you pick up the right person? So a lot of times the vision from the leaders, most time is right, and execution is the key. How you can execute it perfectly. So you need the right person. You know, the person has the motivation, the person has the right talent, and the person can be persistent to execute it, and determined to make it successful. So that's actually something you have to depend on. Another thing is you need to give right amount of time for them to try out. Besides, I think I like Ken was talking about the philosophy of the Silicon Valley. I've been living there for 8 years, and it was totally true. You know, give me time until you prove it's wrong and it's right ideas, right? So another thing I think in this particular AV technology, this is a new disruptive technology. So I think we need to think outside the box. Instead, there's something is out there, you know, you have to have this innovation, not something you can just follow through and execute it, and it will be happen there. So in this way, I think the environment need to be more friendly for the people who has wild ideas, people has the innovation, and give them more of the ground and patience to let them to be able to be successful. And in the meantime, you also, when you passing, you know, when the research stage, you need this kind of mentality. But once you reach certain degree of demonstrating is working, and you want to execute repeatable from 1 to million, 100 million for them. Now in the production stage, you need different talent. Some people very, very regulated and then very disciplined to execute it, processly. So those things is different things I was thinking. It's always hard to find the right balance to see when I should pull the plug, when should I push the button. But a couple of things also you can consider is from the market. If you see the market is happening, and this time you need to really push the speed pedal. In this way, you know, matter for the capitals and everything and team size, it helps to make you more successful. You know, if you 1 people competing with another army with 100 people, it's not possible. But if you 10 people, you might have some chances. If you are 100, at least you have equal opportunity to be winning this battle. Yeah.
Kathy, Helen makes a great point. You know, if the market's developing, sure, you got to go there. But, you know, Intel got into autonomy by buying Mobileye, and there's still no market out there, really. What are some of the guiding principles that lead you to say, yeah, we're going to put money into this even though there's no market out there yet?
Right. So I think from an Intel perspective, we're a big data company trying to solve, and we always talk about solve big problems. So when we looked at autonomous driving, to us, it looked like a big problem that we're not going to be able to solve alone, but how do we find the right pieces and parts to really move it forward in the industry? And when you look at Mobileye as an acquisition, it was really complementary to what we already had. So if you think about it from an Intel perspective, you got to have the brains in the vehicle. You got to have the central processing, right? And it's getting bigger and bigger. The amount of data you got to store, transfer, et cetera, just continues to grow with autonomous vehicles. So from a Mobileye perspective, what they were bringing was actually the vision system at the time that was level 1, level 2, top in the industry, a key sensor element if you're going to be doing automated driving, and by the way, another generator of data, right? So very complementary. Since then, Mobileye's expanded very much so to building a fleet, and as recently announced, even offering a service with partners in Israel, which is a really good learning also for us as a company as to what would it take and what are all these companies experiencing in that space. So when we think about it, it really was complementary to what we were already we were bringing to the table. And I do think it is a big bet, obviously, a very large bet on this space. But I'm going to go to the optimist side of it. I think the hype was there. I think we realized how hard it is now. There's a lot more to tackle besides the technology. I think we are really getting a good handle collectively as an industry on the technology. So now we're probably shifting our focus very much to the regulatory, the human side of it, the trust. How do you get folks to trust getting in the vehicle? It probably is somewhat regional based and age based and all kinds of things. But the one thing we know is we've seen someone gets in one the first time they're terrified, and after about 15, 20 minutes they start to get bored, and the next time it's gone down. Now it only takes 1 or 2 incidences on the road to lose some of that trust, because it's much harder to gain the trust. There's been some studies out there than it is to lose it. I think AAA actually did a study on that. Then you can lose it like that, right? So as an industry, I think the technology piece, everybody's really doing a great job of progressing that. And it's going to be some of these other softer spots that go beyond the big bets on the technology. But we're in a big way.
Last year, Alex Partners came out with a study that looked at electrification and autonomy. And I can't remember how many billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions they said was being invested in this by the auto industry, the tech industry, and others. And their conclusion was a lot of it's going to go up in smoke. Billions of dollars are going to be wasted. Ken, how do you make sure that Ford is not one of the companies that's going to end up wasting a lot of money?
Well, I'll answer that by bringing that together with what Helen and Kathy both said, which is, you have to be guided by what the market is teaching you. And so we're not investing in autonomy because we think it's cool. We're investing in autonomy because the market is teaching us that autonomous vehicles is something that the market wants, and that there are businesses you can construct around an autonomous vehicle. And there are multiple businesses you can build, and there's new ways to create shareholder value by enabling the cars to be connected and by building access to massive amounts of data. And if you do that well, you'll be able to establish the trust that allows you to bring more access to data, that allow you to build better products, that allow you to actually create more data, that you create this virtuous circle. And so the best way to make sure you keep your pulse on that in the right way is to use a more customer-centric strategy or approach. You've got to start with the markets and the customer in mind. And so we are laser focused on talking with consumers, interacting with cities, taking our technology well before it's final, and using our interactions with people, with humans, to shape how we finalize that technology. And that shapes our investment strategy. So let me give you a simple example. When we went to the city of Miami, we didn't know which neighborhood to go to. We didn't know how the community would react to...
You're saying for autonomous pizza delivery.
Exactly. We started with a couple of ideas. with our partnership with Postmates, we're doing package delivery with Domino's to do pizza delivery. We had some mock ride services in place. And so we just kind of showed up and interacted with the city, and we started to learn at a breakneck pace all the things that people needed help with. You know, there are people that had trouble getting to work in certain spots in the city. There were people that didn't have a way to get to health care. There were city centers that needed to have new modes of transportation because public transportation didn't have enough volume to service the needs. And so we learned all these things about how an autonomous ride service might be integrated into that society in a way that would create value. So we're really confident that the investment we're putting into our AV is going to put an autonomous ride service in that city. To John's point, you're not going to do it everywhere. You got to do it in a place that you know, that you've mapped, you've studied, you've tested, you've validated. But more importantly for this point is you've done the human-centered work to know how do you actually operate the business there. Then you know that your investment's going to turn into a profitable business, and it's going to be good for the people that will use the business. This is a win-win. It's good for the consumers, it's going to be good for our company, and it's going to be good for the city because it's going to relieve some of the pain points that they've been wrestling with for years. So we're going to take that model and replicate it, learn, and continue to invest. And it's not just about investing in the robot brain. This is really important. You got to make investments across the whole spectrum of what does it take to put a smart vehicle into what's becoming an increasingly smart world. So there's got to be investments in the connectivity strategy, in the interior of the vehicle. How are people going to interact with the autonomous vehicle? What are they going to do when they're in the vehicle, when they're riding? You know, they're not driving, so they're going to be doing something. How will they interface and get into the vehicle? How will they hail it? How, you know, there are all these human-centered questions that you need to invest to solve. And we're not smart enough to solve it without doing a bunch of human-centered research. That's guiding us.
Okay, so you focus on the human, you focus on the customer, you've got all these regulatory and legislative needs to meet. So John Lochner, you guys did the Chevrolet Bolt. Volt, I should say, the plug-in.
Right.
Fantastic car. You played a key role in bringing that thing to market, conceiving of it and all. Brilliant car. The owners I've talked to tell me to a person, this is the best car I've ever owned, and the market largely shrugged. So how do you deal with placing big bets and doing all your homework and the market shrugs?
Yeah, to a certain extent, maybe the Volt was a bit ahead of its time. But I tell you, as a company, we got a lot out of that thing, okay? You know, that was the first time that a lithium-ion battery had been put in a high-volume vehicle other than Tesla, which was relatively small at the time we kicked off the Volt. We learned and built a lot of capability that we leverage to this day for having done that. You could say, yeah, the sales didn't materialize according to what everybody had hoped and anticipated, but let's face it, EVs are still a minuscule piece of business in the US today. Whether you're talking about Bolt or Volt or any other brand, EV sales are small. And the reason why is because they're priced well above an internal combustion engine vehicle, even when you account for the incentive that you get, you know, the tax credit incentive that you get from the US government. And, you know, that's one of the things that's got to be addressed going forward is we've got to get the affordability of electric vehicles down to the level that they're fully competitive with internal combustion engine vehicles. And when that starts to happen, and we build a broader portfolio of vehicles, you can't just have one or two or three out there. You need to have a range of vehicles that are going to appeal to a much broader set of buyers than just those people that are predisposed to buy an EV regardless of what it is. And so, you know, the market's going to have to develop for EVs to realize their full potential, even when we do our part on the cost side and with range and capability. I'd like to offer a comment on your observation. You said it was Alex Partners that put out this study about the billions of dollars that are being invested. I would only offer this. Automotive is a $1 trillion business. Trillion, not billion, $1 trillion business. There are very few $1 trillion businesses in the world. If you want to be a $1 trillion business, you're going to have to spend some billions of dollars to make sure that you're part of it going forward. If you're not willing to do that, you're not going to be part of the $1 trillion business going forward. You look at companies like Apple, for example. You ask yourself, why would Apple ever get into EVs, vehicles, in any way, shape, or form into this business? And by the way, I'm not sure they will, but certainly there are a lot of reports that they're looking at it. Well, Apple's not, they're not being foolish about this thing. They look at automotive and they say, this is a $1 trillion business. And if we want to continue to grow Apple, should we really overlook this business in perpetuity? Or should we find something that we could do as an enterprise that would bring some unique value? Now, to your point about flushing billions of dollars, yes, billions of dollars will be flushed, you can be sure. In fact, there are probably over 200 ride-sharing companies in the world. I'm aware that more than $200 billion of venture capital alone has been put into those businesses. Okay, more than 200 billion has been invested to date. Will some of that get flushed? You can bet on it, because the world doesn't need 200 ride-sharing companies, okay? Any more than it needs 200 of any particular company in any particular business. But again, if you want to be part of the future, then you're going to have to be willing to put some money at risk. You need to have a clever strategy in mind, so you figure that somebody else's billions are going to get flushed. It's not going to be mine. But you either participate or you don't. And I think, to be quite honest, you're going to see the automotive industry stratify into two different sort of categories. And in fact, I've talked to Dave Cole. He and I have blogged about this and talked about this. It's the haves and the have-nots. The haves will make the investment. They'll have the financial capability to do it. They'll put money to work to be part of the automotive future. The have-nots will look at it and they'll say, gee, I don't know if we have the financial wherewithal to be able to do that. Gee, we're not going to really invest to the level that probably we should. And you're going to see some of that take place over the next 5 to 10 years, you can be sure. And that's also part of this whole story about mergers and acquisitions in automotive. That's all part of this picture as well. If you can't afford to do it by yourself, you're going to try to figure out how you can either partner with other people or acquire other companies so you can somehow participate in the automotive industry of the future.
Real
Well
good.
said, John. I agree with everything you said.
Preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Hey, we've
What
got
he said.
what he
exactly.
said. We've got a number of questions that have come in from the audience here. Maybe we ought to get to some of them. Let's see. To what extent? And Helen, why don't I throw this to you?
Okay.
To what extent do you fund early stages of R&D versus relying on startups or suppliers to bring proven innovation to you?
Okay, I think when you talk about competition, it's time to the market. So if you know earlier some people has this technology and being expert in this domain, but may not be exactly this application you're looking for, but that maybe have 80%, 90% what you're looking for, even 50 or 60%, then you should seeking for collaboration, because you can be the first one reach the end of the point, right? So I think because that's philosophy, so you can figure out how you allocating resources. If there's something out there, you can collaborating with them as partner, go do it. If there's something is small startup and you can acquire them to be part of you, go do it. And if there's something you figure out from the whole industry never exists, something is brand new, develop yourself. So then the question starting become easy. But sometimes the thing is because we're in a much high-tech world, and it's very complex. When I see the rule is very simple, but in reality, when you make judgment, if this category they fall into, it sometimes have a blur boundaries. So that's part is you rely on the leader has these visions and rely on the team of the work to be able to help you to build this foundation to make the right judgment. And you can never make your judgment 100% right. and the technology always faulty tolerant. So which means you allow yourself to make some mistake. But if you don't bet, you have you exactly like John mentioned. If you want to win this business, better be part of it. And it's $1 trillion business, so you have the willingness to spending $1 billion. It's only 0.1% of it. So which is a very small portion of it. So you need to be able to in this business. On the other hand, on this side, we have to be able to work together with the whole industry to help him move forward. So in this way, you can help rely on the team to help you to make the right decision. On the other hand, even you make 20% of wrong decisions or 30%, it's no big deal. You are winning ahead of the crowd. Yeah.
Go ahead,
Just
Jen.
something to add from an Intel perspective. We actually have an Intel Capital part of our company that goes out and makes independent investments. And in the spirit of bold moves that we really want to be in automotive, about 2 years ago, we earmarked $400 million to say that's just going to be set aside for things for automotive and in that space, independent of everything else. And the beauty of actually what we do with these guys is they will work with a few folks out of my team, for example, to go out and identify lots of different companies and startups and place all kinds of bets in these companies. You may eventually acquire them, and of course we do that as well, but we just had an event last week for Intel Capital where they bring in all 300 of these Intel Capital, and a big portion of them now start to be automotive, and come in and tell us what they're doing, what's new and exciting, and make it a very formal process where they can come in, and some of it competes with things we're doing internally. A lot of it's things you've never even heard of or can't imagine, but we have very specifically now, which I love, put a process in place to say, we have a goal, we want to invest in these kinds of companies, certain amount of money. We know all those bets won't play, and by the way, if it helps forward the industry in general, that's all good. And then when you find those few that are key and critical and really make sense to integrate, pull them in as soon as possible. So anyway, it seems to be working. We like it.
Yeah, I want to build on that and also comment on the making the bets and staying in the game, because I think to the question of how do you decide whether you buy or build when it comes to early stage research and tech, I think it's important to make both small bets and big bets. And when you're making small bets, you can't just make one or two. You've got to cast a pretty broad net because you don't have the ability to pick the winner when you're betting on very early stage research. And so we invest internally to equip ourselves to be smart buyers and smart surveyors of small bets. And then we forge collaborations and do research proof of concepts, and we collaborate with startups. And we do it across a fairly wide spectrum from connectivity to advanced compute chip architectures to quantum computing to advanced nanomaterials to 3D printing, all across the landscape. But then to John's earlier point, you got to make a couple of big bets too that are necessary in order to create the future in this massive industry. And pretty much the entire industry has sort of honed in on the fact that electrification of our propulsion systems and autonomous vehicles are two areas where if you want to play with the big companies and you want to be alive, you better place a couple of big bets on how to bring that to market. So I think doing across that whole spectrum is really important.
Jeff, you got some thoughts on that of, when do you bring in startups? So, how do you balance all this that's being thrown at you?
That's something we're learning how to do. Our history is, are we supposed to do a take cover drill now?
No.
Well, don't you just love it here? We're talking about all this future technology and a damn horn is honking.
That's right. That's right.
So in the past, we've been very much driven by internal innovation, internal inventions. We're seeing, as the whole panel discussed here now, that's no longer sufficient in this new world. You can't go it alone anymore. So I would say we're maybe 30-70 right now, 30% looking to the outside and partnering, and 70% internal innovation. Having said that, though, I guess for us, it's always been a collaboration with our customers that have brought ideas out of the R&D center and into production. And really, even if I go back to you asked before, how do you know when to stop a project? I was sitting here thinking, you know, very often what happens is we'll take a new idea and go to a customer and show it to them, and they'll say, yeah, that doesn't fit at all, we really don't need that. But by the way, that piece of that in there, could you do that in the back of the transmission or something like that? And then we stop the first idea because now we know a customer wants the second idea. So that collaboration has always been important, but now much more multifaceted as we've been discussing here.
John, any other thoughts to add to that? The balance of startups and, you know, how do you funnel all these thousands of ideas being flung at you?
So we do both, okay? We have GM Ventures, which is our venture capital subsidiary. I'm also responsible for that. We invest equity in startup companies that are developing automotive-related technology. It's early stage stuff. In fact, we have several co-investments with Intel Capital. We've co-invested with them before, and it makes a lot of sense because there are a lot of areas where we can collaborate with Intel and Intel Capital quite effectively. So we work back and forth with them. At the same time, internal to research and development, we have internal startups. That's what I've called them, or ISUs as they're known, because everything in automotive needs an acronym. So it wouldn't be good if they didn't have an acronym. Internal startups are mirrored exactly along the lines of venture capital. Okay, in venture capital, you have multiple funding rounds: Series A, Series B, Series C, Series D. Investors have a chance to decide whether they're going to continue to invest or whether they're going to say that's enough and pull the plug. That's how venture capital works. We work it exactly the same way in-house. You have the right to exist from one gate to the next. Beyond that, you have to come in and you have to demonstrate that you've made technical progress and you've made commercial progress. Because inventions are great, but inventions only become innovations when they get commercialized. All the inventions in the world are not innovations, okay? And it's really important to understand that innovation has two parts. Yes, it has an invention part, but the second part is commercializing that into a product or a service, okay? So we insist that the internal startups show progress on both dimensions from gate to gate, just like venture capital, which is concerned about exactly the same two things. Now, we avoid, to the maximum possible extent, putting startups against in-house internal startups. We know from previous experience that if it's in-house against an outside project, there's always some question as to whether it's truly fair, it's truly transparent, and so on and so forth. So for the good of ourselves and for the good of startups, we avoid that to the maximum possible extent, and I think we've been quite successful in doing that.
Real good. Let's see, there was another one here that I thought was pretty good. And yeah, Helen, I'm going to start with you again. Going from hardware only to software is impacting the organizational structure of companies. How successful are you with restructuring your organization for innovation?
Innovation, okay. Actually, I'm not working for a software company, but I personal background actually is in Harvard. I'm a hardcore Harvard engineer, my background. So, and I have spending quite some of my time in the Harvard companies, and recently two employer I'm working with is both in the software domain, and they're pioneered in US and China. So this way, I would see is I would see a couple of things slightly different. The mindset is different. Harvard engineer is very following the principles and the rules and those things, but the software engineers have this amazing quicker iterations. What I mean, when they developing, when you're talking about the software engineers, they say, oh, well, I'm working this project, but they are actually, in 3 months, they're working on a second project. And for us, in Harvard domains, it's years. We count by years, we don't count by months. So this slightly things are different. And another thing is, software need hardware as a foundation to build on top of it. So the software has this foundation so they can quickly do the iterations because the hardware doesn't change that much. then the software can make quick change to make it stable and make it reliable. But on the other hand, then this mindset and the working style and also how to work together is very different. And particular for the AV technology is a system. You're building a system, including hardware and software. So both of the different army of the talents have to work together to jointly develop this technology. Because of this, I think this is a good technology to make this both side when working together and toward to reach a product level.
Real good. And Jeff, I think it's a good question for you too. Yeah, how have you changed your organizational structure as software has become so much more of what you do?
Well, personally, for me, it's been very unpleasant because we made the decision 3 years ago that as this digitalization and software is coming at us, we wanted to leverage IT because you need a backbone to support clouds and connectivity of machines on your factory floor and everything else. So we wanted to leverage that, so we wanted to put our digital effort with it. And so the decision was made that IT should report to the CTO. So now I have to also get phone calls when the network doesn't work in Mexico or wherever. But it is also fun because you get the digitalization part of that along with it, and I think you really do need those together to leverage that kind of thing. So we definitely have done reorganizing along those lines, yeah.
Ken?
So I think there's really two questions embedded in that one question. The first is organization, but I think the second question that's embedded in that is how do you adjust your business processes, which is on a different axis than how you organize your company. And so on the organize your company axis, we've made some decisions that I think have enabled us to move at better speed and has allowed us to bring technology into our products with less friction. We bundled together our IT organization with our product organization under the leadership of Joe Henricks. And that's going to allow, and it already has allowed us to streamline our order to delivery process. It's allowed us to bring technology into our manufacturing operations with more agility and to identify things that we hadn't identified before. And it allows us to bring our product development organization closer together with our IT enterprise. And so there's some really good things coming out of that. But on the business process axis, I think there's some really important things that companies should pay attention to, which is that the clock speed of hardware is different than the clock speed of software. And so we've had to reinvent and create separate business processes for bringing software and digital solutions from conception all the way through production with a totally different process than we use for our hardware. And we learned the hard way that you can't use the same one but just try to run it faster because it just doesn't work. Because the whole company was wired around the surety processes of ensuring that the hardware meets all the standards, has all the safety requirements met, and meets all the crash requirements and so on and so forth. Software is a different animal, and it needs to develop with a more iterative strategy. And we've learned that by standing up these rapid, we call them DevOps teams, it's allowed us to quickly build prototypes, make them better based on the early experiences, deploy them quickly, and then have the ability to update them once they are updated and refreshed based on experience and use. And by the way, that's possible now because you can over-the-air update capabilities in the vehicle using over-the-air update technology. And so it's really important to have a business process in place so that you can implement improvements that are software-based that don't have to wait for the hardware to get refreshed.
Just one other comment, maybe to take this a little bit narrower into the automated driving space. One of the things we've had to really do is traditionally, I too, hardware background, we actually figured out, same university. We traditionally would do validation and testing at a component level. And software would traditionally do maybe at a functional level. their validation. And now we've had to really pivot the team to really be looking at the system level and at the functional safety across the combination. And so this whole automated driving has really brought forward the need to figure out a better way than driving millions and millions of miles to validate these cars, because we can't find every use case around the globe. So again, coming back to that, getting the right kind of folks, either homegrown or brought in from other industries, whether it's industrial or whatever, that are familiar with functional safety at a system level. How can you take different aspects of the vehicle, hardware, software, and design the system so that you've got that fail-safe mode, right? One is to ensure the software doesn't ever drive you into an unsafe condition, for example, and I know if you listen to the discussions around RSS, responsible sensitive safety models, or any other out there for validating automated vehicles for an industry, finding the right people that can now focus on that in addition to the traditional component level, right? So it's a growing space that I think all of us are challenged to find the right people that have that broad of an understanding and can make that happen for us.
Well, good. John Lochner, come to you. Same thought. This restructuring with getting into being much more of a software company, because even though General Motors got all kinds of negative headlines for recent layoffs, what sort of went under the radar is GM was hiring at the same time.
That's true. For the past several years, we've been about changing, basically the technical footprint of the organization from one that is nearly exclusively hardware oriented to one that's far more software oriented. And we've got organizations now for example, in Markham, Canada, where we've got a huge amount of software capability. And why did we go to Markham? Because that's where BlackBerry was. And so there were a lot of software engineers that were in the neighborhood that we thought we could recruit and get them working on our projects, and that's been quite successful. We also built a sizable organization in Herzliya, Israel, right outside Tel Aviv. And if you know Israel, you know that they have a tremendous amount of software expertise in Israel. And so we've got several hundred people in Israel that are working on software. We've also hired a lot of people in Warren, at the Tech Center in Warren, that have software expertise in one place or another. And so if you were just to do a nose count of, let's say, go back 3 or 4 years and look at the number of people that were involved directly in software as opposed to what we have now, the difference is dramatic in terms of having a few people, maybe a few hundred, to now we have thousands of people that are involved in one way or another.
Real good. There's a bunch more questions here from you, the audience, but I've been keeping track, and to get through the whole group takes about 10 minutes, and we've got about 3 minutes left. So I think this is actually a good point to wrap this up. But I hope you guys have all enjoyed this discussion, because there's a lot of firepower up here on the stage with a lot of great insight into how this industry has got one foot in the past, one foot in the future, and is trying to balance the two. And please join me in a warm round of applause for our panelists. But good job, you all. And with that, we'll wrap it up.